Greetings everyone, Brett here with Hammerhead Model Making, back with another build episode. Today we will be building Hobby Boss's 1/72nd scale F9F Panther. Now, I set out to build this kit as part of my Jolly Rogers collection, and I was not necessarily interested in the aircraft itself. Personally, I think it was kind of ugly, and this was more of just a build because I needed it for my collection, and I was just going to try and get it out of the way. Plus, I hadn't had great experience with Hobby Boss in the past. I did build their Bearcat, and the Bearcat was actually a decent little kit, but it was like a simple kit. So I just wasn't quite sure what to expect with this. But let me just tell you in advance, I was completely surprised and completely wrong about this kit. And I ended up absolutely loving this kit by the end of the build. So I hope that you will see why I enjoyed this kit throughout this video. But you can see just through in this unboxing, there's actually a lot of detail in this kit, and it is really well engineered and it looks really nice. I will not be using the kit decals. As I said, I will be doing this as part of my Jolly Rogers collection, so I'll be using the CTA decals for that. However, the few decals that I did use from the kit decals were actually quite nice. So like pretty much every other aircraft kit known to man, construction begins in the cockpit, and the cockpit has few parts, but the parts that are in there are quite detailed. You can see a lot of that raised detail on the instrument panel and the side panels there, and it's pretty decent. The seat is multi-part as well, and looks the part. We also built up the nose landing gear wheel well at the same time. There's probably my biggest gripe about this kit, which is going to be saying much because it's not really a bad gripe. It's just the fact that the nose gear strut is integrated into the gear well itself. And I tried test fitting to see if I could get it to put in after the fact, after the construction's done, and it just wouldn't work. So you just have to be careful while you're handling it and painting and doing all that stuff, that you don't break it off. It is fairly fragile, so just be aware. So at this point, like I said, construction is pretty simple, so we can actually start getting to painting, and right now I'm just priming it. And one of the neat things about these really early jets is I like the fact that we were kind of transitioning out of World War II and into what we would call the modern jet age. So the jet itself obviously is a much more complex machine, but one of the fun things is the cockpit is still painted in World War II interior green, and so it's just kind of fun to start seeing those as the technology progresses and the way that we build and manufacture our aircraft changes. And it's just kind of neat to see the middle transition part in there, because the ejection seat is painted gray. So it's just, to me, I found that fascinating, just to start seeing the transition from what we would consider a more modern aircraft, full of grays and blacks and things like that, versus the old World War II style with that interior zinc chromate green color. So here we're just spraying in that color, getting the cockpit nice, good, and coated. There is a portion of the backrest that does stick out, so just make sure you're getting the back side of the cockpit painted as well, because that will be visible through the canopy. And now we can paint the ejection seat. The seat is rather simple, but it looks nice. It looks the part. After painting it, I will add some masking tape seat belts to it, just to kind of add a little bit of detail. And I didn't do a lot of scratch building in this kit. In fact, adding the seat belts, and then a little bit later on in the video, I'll show you where I add some extra details into the cockpit. Those were the only things I scratch built on this kit, and it really stands on its own as a decently detailed kit. I was quite happy with it. So main landing gear wheel wells, I decided to go ahead and paint those up now, instead of having to mask them off and paint them later. Just figured it'd be easier. Again, like I mentioned, now we're transitioning into like that more modern look where we paint the wheel wells white, as opposed to like a primer color or natural metal color that you'd see on World War II fighters. So kind of just this cool transition period for military aviation. So at this point, with all the airbrushing done, I can go in and start hand painting some of the details. The kit does come with a decal for the front instrument panel, but nothing for the sidewall detail. So ultimately, I chose just to hand paint everything, just that it would all match. And like I said, there's a lot of good raised detail in the cockpit here. So careful application of some acrylic paint, and it turns out pretty decent, I think. When painting with, so this is a Vallejo color that I'm using right now for my brush paint. The Vallejo colors do work a little bit better if you do thin them slightly. For applications like this, I just use tap water when I thin it. But some of the Vallejo paints tend to look a little or feel a little thick out of the bottle, so a little bit of water helps thin it pretty good. Just dry brushing with a light gray color just to pop out some of these raised details, and so that you can see them well enough. I mean, if you really studied the cockpit of the Panther, and I'm sure you could add splashes of color in there, yellows and reds or whatever, according to references. I was going to be keeping the canopy closed on this, so I wasn't too concerned with that. Now with all the detail painting done, we can go ahead and gloss coat everything so that we can give it a wash and further pick out some details. Once again, I'm using my trusty Alclad Aqua Gloss, and it hasn't failed me yet. So give everything a nice liberal coat. The nice thing about the Revell or the Alclad Aqua Gloss is that it dries relatively quickly, especially dries to the touch. You could probably handle parts within less than 5 minutes of spraying it. But before I apply like an enamel wash like this, I usually let it dry for a good 5 or 6 hours just to make sure that it's actually cured. You just have to be careful because if you do go a little too aggressive with an enamel thinner trying to remove some of the wash or whatever, you could end up stripping the paint. So just be aware. But generally the MIG washes really don't require enamel thinner to remove it. And that's one of the big reasons why I like using it. Anyway, so we're just applying the wash to all the cockpit parts, the wheel well parts, and now the ejection seat. And you can see I've added the masking tape seat belts. I do have a tutorial on how to do masking tape seat belts, so go ahead and check out that video if you get a chance. So now once the actual wash has dried, I usually let it sit for about 30 minutes for it to dry. Then we can just go ahead and remove the excess with a cotton bud. And generally it's pretty painless. And I highly recommend them. So now that the wash is done, we can matte coat everything and remove that shine, and kind of just ties everything together. So now we can start assembling everything. But like I said, I think that the cockpit is nice and detailed for the scale, and for the kit was relatively inexpensive as well. So we can install the tailpipe here, and there's not really much detail. There is a little bit of compressor detail at the very back end there, but you'd really have to strain hard to look inside and see it, but it is there. And we can glue in the wheel well. There's very positive attachment points here, so there's never any doubt as to where things go and how it lines up. And generally the fit here was pretty much flawless. I can't think of anything to complain about here. One thing you should be aware of, this aircraft is a tail sitter, so nose weight is required. Fortunately, there is a rather large space at the very front of the aircraft to put weights in. So I'm just using some lead fishing weight here, and we just kind of super glue it all in and build up the stack. Now, I've been burned in the past with kits thinking that I put in enough nose weight, and in reality I didn't. So I probably put way more nose weight into this thing than is required, but again, I didn't want to take any chances. And there's kind of a satisfaction to the heft of the airplane once it's done with all that weight in there. I kind of like it. So once we get in the right amount of nose weight, we can close up the fuselage. And like I said, the fit here was pretty flawless. I had to do very little sanding and filling on this kit, and in some places almost none at all. Just just a quick swipe with a fine grit sanding stick, and it was good to go. I think probably the part that I had to do the most sanding was just this upper seam on the nose here, and it's probably because I had just a little bit too much nose weight in there, but I got it to work. So here's, like I mentioned before, here is where I decided to add just a little bit more detail on the actual aircraft. There are a few sets of instruments or switches that sit on top of the instrument cowl next to the gun sight, so I just decided to represent that with tiny little bits of plastic card. Obviously they're just little blocks, so very little detailing, but I like it. At this point, you have to decide what kind of ordnance you're going to have on the aircraft so that you can drill the holes for them. I decided to go with just bombs. However, you have the option of bombs and or rockets. You can see the holes there. And curiously, you can also see the lines where if you wanted to try and simulate folded wings, it gives you an idea of where to cut. However, it does not give you any parts to do folded wings, so you'd have to either get aftermarket or scratch built. So here I'm drilling out the gun barrels on the front of the aircraft. They're quite prominent and really benefit from getting drilled out. Here I'm just using a tiny drill bit. I couldn't tell you what size this is as they are unlabeled, but I just chose one that was the appropriate size to drill out. And just 2 minutes of drilling kind of goes a long way to dressing up the look of the aircraft. And again, I also have a tutorial on drilling out gun barrels and things like that in another video. So now we can apply the lower wings. And again, here the fit was pretty much spot on. The actual joins here are on actual panel lines, so you don't necessarily have to worry about filling in panel lines. And it pretty much just snaps into place. My second grievance with the kit is that they do not give you any first stage compressor or blanking of the intakes. There's a small little intake trunk piece that you put on, and then it just kind of goes into the void of the wing. Again, you probably wouldn't see any of that detail. Again, this does only have one engine, so you wouldn't actually see like the full front, face of the first stage compressor. But you should be able to at least see how the trunk or the intake trunk would curve back towards the engine on the real aircraft. But we're such a small scale here that unless you picked up the model and were shining a light directly down the intake trunks, you wouldn't notice. So just, they could have done it, but they chose not to, and that's fine. So now we're just painting the instrument combing and the back deck of the cockpit, painting it black here, and then we'll give it a dry brush of light gray, similar to like how we did on the instrument panels, and just to kind of pop out some of the detail, because there is some decent detail both on the back deck and the detail that I added on the front there. So and the canopies are quite large, and Hobby Boss did a really good job. They're very crystal clear canopies, so you will see that stuff through the canopies. We can finish the rest of the construction here. Many of these parts were almost like a snap fit and required almost no glue. But obviously you just want to be sure, make sure it's all secure, get it glued anyways. But like I said, I will sing the praises of this kit. The fit was great and very few issues. We can add the wingtip tanks to the aircraft. These are a two-piece affair, so these did require a little bit of sanding, but nothing that was too terrible. And they just slot right on and definitely look the part there. So quite pleased with those. And one of my favorite details, and it's one a lot of people kind of fail to do, but it's really an easy thing to do, is to add a little bit of glass for the gun sight. And the kit does not come with a clear part for here. The gun sight is integrated into the instrument panel part. So if you want it, you have to build your own. I'm just using a piece of acetate, clear acetate, and cut to size, and then just super glued on. So now we can add the canopy and windscreen. Again, fit here was great. It looks good. I was a little concerned that the back canopy wouldn't fit on, but I was proven wrong, and it fits on just great and snug and butts up to the front windscreen with no gaps. So again, kudos to Hobby Boss. This was just a great, well-engineered little kit. I decided to add the pylons on at this point. They get painted the same color as the rest of the body, so it just made sense to get them added on here instead of painting them separately. So off camera, I did prime everything black, and now we can go ahead with our main body coat. In this case, it is dull aluminum by Vallejo, and this aircraft was left in a natural aluminum. Eventually, when they moved from the F9F Panther to the Cougar, they went with the gloss blue look on those. But I rather kind of like this all metal look because none of the other aircraft within the Jolly Roger series had a natural metal look, and it's just kind of a nice departure from either all of the World War II blues and then the late Cold War light gold gray looks. So it's kind of neat, and but it's simple. The aircraft was overall natural metal. I did pick out a few panels, so you can see some panels on the wing there that I decided to do in just a slightly darker metallic color. So that's basically just the dull aluminum with a little bit of steel color mixed in. And now I'm doing this panel on the nose. I'm not quite sure if this was, unit markings, or I don't think it's an anti-glare panel because it's only the very tip of the nose beyond what the pilot would be able to see. But nevertheless, doing that with NATO black, and quite pleased with the results there. So there's very few pictures of these Panthers in Jolly Roger service, and so the few pictures that I did find, they weren't terribly weathered. So that's why I didn't necessarily go with a lot of different like panel variation. That's also why I didn't do any kind of undercoat mottling. Just kind of go for a good, nice, uniform aluminum color here. While we have the airbrush out, we go ahead and paint up the ordnance. The bombs were simple, but they look the part. Again, 3-part affair, 2 halves of the bomb, and then the tail fins add on separately. So they build up pretty nicely. The kit does not supply decals for the bomb, so if you want to do any detail on it, you have to hand paint it yourself or get aftermarket decals. Gloss coat, seal in all of our paintwork here, and prep it for decals and weathering. So pretty straightforward. Typically when I'm doing a gloss coat on a kit like this, you can see me here, I'm holding the one wing. So I'll gloss coat everything, obviously, except for that one wing. Give it about 10 minutes. That's when the gloss coat is dry to the touch, and then finish up the other wing. So now we can apply the decals. Again, these are the CTA decals of the Jolly Roger timeline set. So there's actually 3 different sets for the Jolly Rogers timeline that you have to get the complete series. The decals, CTA decals, they're very nice. You've seen me use them on a couple of previous planes on the channel before, but they're great decals. They're very thin. Colors are great. Registry is great. So no complaints here. We apply the decal as normal, and then just use a little piece of paper towel to remove the excess water and kind of push the decal onto the surface. Get it to nice and flat on there to avoid any silvering. The actual Jolly Roger flag here is a 2-part affair, so you have a white piece that goes on first. Let that dry a little bit, then you can apply the black part of the flag so that it looks nice and strong, as opposed to like a kind of a see-through whitish color. So I like the look. I love the skull and crossbones on this. I think it just looks great. Even though they're small, I still like it. So we do the rest of the decals just the same way, same process. And once we've applied them all and they've dried a little bit, I do apply some Solvaset to help conform the decals. And here you can see I've got a visitor to my workbench. I do live in a house with cats, and they are very curious and like to see what's going on. So this one here just decided that he needed to photobomb my work here and try to eat my paintbrush. But generally, I try not to keep the cats on the workbench. So moving on, we can now do a panel wash. I am using the MIGS interior panel wash. I know this isn't the interior, but this is just kind of a good, like, dirty gray color. It's not very strong, so you're not going to get a huge contrast if I was using like the dark brown color that I normally use, or like a black color, but enough just to kind of give some contrast to the panel lines and just make them pop a little bit. But like I mentioned before, I wasn't going to go too heavily weathered, so I just wanted something to give a hint, just to suggest the panel lines, but not necessarily bring your attention full front to the panel lines. So we just we apply this all over, get it in all the panel lines. You can, really in reality, you could use a large, wide, flat brush and just brush the whole model. But that just ends up wasting wash. So I try to do more of like a pin wash type style where I'm, attempting to apply it more or less in the panel lines. And just like with the interior parts, once it's dry, we can wipe it off. I usually start with a paper towel first, just because I can get a wider area, wider coverage for removing it, and then eventually move to a cotton bud in harder to reach areas, or areas that are just a little bit more stubborn and need a little more work to get it removed. But in general, this paper towel will take about 90% of the wash off, and then, like I said, just use the cotton bud to finish up in places that need it. Quite pleased with how the wash turned out. To me, it's just the right amount of, it's there. You can see the panel lines, but it's not overwhelming and overbearing. So quite pleased with how it's turning out. So at this point, we can seal in all of our work here with satin varnish. I wanted to be able to leave a little bit of the shine of the metallic color coming through, but I didn't want it to be so shiny as, looking kind of toy-like that the gloss coat kind of gives it. So out comes the satin varnish, and we give the whole model a nice good wet coat of the satin varnish, and that'll give us kind of that nice middle ground between matte and shiny. So at this point, we'll do a little bit of oil weathering. I wanted to show just a little bit of oil streaking kind of back where the engine would be. So first we just apply little dots of it, and then we use a brush with thinner on it and kind of pull those dots back. And it will take a couple of applications to kind of get the right strength that I want. So you'll see I apply a few more dots, and I keep doing this, apply dots, pull it back until I'm satisfied with it. And then on the upper surfaces, I just wanted to give a little hint of kind of dust and grime on there where the ground crew would be working on it. So we apply a couple dots of the oil paint, and then using this wide flat brush, we kind of just work it in and feather it out. And then additionally, I just wanted to give a little hint of fading on the metal and kind of a little bit of that aluminum oxidation that happens sometimes. So we're just using a white oil paint here. And again, just using that flat or that round wide brush and just blending it in. And really, I'm just trying to blend it in so you only just kind of see hints of it, and so that it's not very strong. I think once you see the final result, I think you'll see what I'm going for. Just kind of hints of just some of that oxidation on the aluminum. So I'll do it to the fuselage and then do it to the upper surfaces of the wings as well. This will also kind of help blend the decals just a little bit so they're not quite so strong. And when you show that there's weathering both on top of the paint work and the decal work, it just helps blend everything together. So I definitely, come from the school of do all your weathering over the decals so that your decals can also get weathered, because it looks kind of strange sometimes when you have a really weathered aircraft, but the decals are all bright and shiny and new. Just doesn't quite look right to my eye. So at this point, we can remove the masking. And I didn't show the process of masking on this one, but basically I used some, I believe it's a 2mm Tamiya tape, and kind of outlined the frames, and then used a liquid mask for the kind of the interior parts. So just trying to get that all removed. It does take a little while. And one of the things I don't necessarily love about the liquid mask is you could see there how some of the paint was flaking. Just kind of makes a mess, but doesn't really necessarily harm anything. But just kind of have to work it off. Be careful not to scratch your canopy. So I'm just very gently using my fresh blade to kind of lift the paint up so I can use the tweezers the tape up so I can use the tweezers to get it off. I find that it's easier to use a fresh blade, and I end up causing less problems with a fresh blade than I would if I was using like an older dull blade. So, but just kind of work around, get all the the masking removed, and voila, got a nice shiny cockpit there. So, like I said, this is a great little kit. Landing gear all fits on nicely. I did sand the bottoms of the wheels a little bit just to give a nice flat area for the aircraft to sit on, and add our ordnance on. Again, a lot of these parts were almost just snap fit. They just slot in and require just very little glue here. So quite happy with this. I did the little hand painted line around the front of the bomb there, just to kind of give it a little bit of color. And now we just kind of add on all the tiny little parts that it has. Pitot tube, and then final part to add on after that is the pilot's boarding step. So there's a tiny little step that pops out so the pilot can climb up into his aircraft. And with that, we are done. So like I said, I ended up really loving this kit. It was fun, it was simple, it was fast, and it looks great. And I'm going to buy a couple more so I can do a couple more different versions of this, because it was just a fun little kit. And now I'm in love with this plane. The plane that I thought was ugly before. So anyways, if you've made it this far, thanks for sticking around. If you haven't yet, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. It would help me out, and I appreciate it. And as of the recording of this video, we just hit 5,000 subscribers. So thank you to everyone. I am very grateful and humbled. And we'll see you on the next video. Cheers.